Good Saturday morning to everybody, and welcome to Legal Notes with Mary Ann Charron and Ned Barron from Charter Oak Law Group. I am Gary Byron. Good morning there, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? It's great to see you this morning.
Fantastic.
There you go. It's
Bright and
normal.
early,
That's
yes.
as usual.
I was waiting for that.
We were all waiting for Ned to jump in.
Hey, great show last week. I really enjoyed that. A little courtroom drama in here.
Thank
Good
you.
stuff. Good stuff.
It is. That's, life gives you all those ebbs and flows, and,
It's true.
It's not easy. Those are not easy decisions.
How often are you, though, in the courtroom?
Well,
Pre-COVID?
yeah.
Or
Pre-COVID.
Sure, yeah. In a normal situation.
Every week.
Yeah.
Every
Not
week.
every day of every week, right?
No, usually, I don't know. I probably have hearings maybe a little bit more often than Ned does, but absolutely at least I have hearings twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week.
Okay.
yeah, I'm finding that I'm enjoying more doing the estate planning side of things as opposed to the probate litigation, only because as I get older, and I'm not that much older than Mary Ann, but that I'm less and less wanting to deal with conflict.
Well, you guys are partners, so you can specialize and do one thing, while she can specialize and do something else.
Yes, but
Within the same
for
practice.
anybody, conflict is really stressful.
It can be stressful. It's not quite the same, that adrenal rush, because afterward, it's so, let's face it, when you go to court, as I've told Ned, and I've told my kids when they try to bug me, like nobody pays me to lose. I've never had a client say, don't worry, we still love you and we'll pay you no matter. Right? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay, Mayor. So,
right.
so you have to be on, and you have that one shot, and it is very stressful. So you try to always put your best foot forward, but
Well, and also when you're in probate court, that it's not just, you're just not just talking about money, right? Like say if you're in civil
Absolutely.
court, it's not just
Absolutely.
about was the contract violated, right? Or
True.
or breached, right? That's one thing. But this is, you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with people's health. You're dealing with their living situations. You're dealing with the basic necessities of life. Yeah. And like we talked about last week about whether or not someone should continue to be on a feeding tube.
yeah.
That is really stressful when you are part of that. No matter what side you're on, there's the human life that, that's in the balance. And that's the thing that makes probate court so one reason why we really like probate court, but also one of the reasons why when you have litigation, you have conflict, that it makes it even that more stressful.
They're just such tough calls. They really are. You're in a way, they're playing God in some ways, where who's to determine what at this point or at this point? Mm-hmm. Like I think you even said this last week. You're not in them, in their head or in their, you don't know what state that, what appears to be one state, what appears to be vegetative, where you think it's going to go on forever.
Right.
It could be something temporary, and they come out of it even if it's a month, who's to,
It's
how do you know?
really hard. It's really hard because we don't know. And we try our best when we are healthy to make conscious choices and decisions about what we think we would like. But when you're younger, we make certain decisions based on our life experience and what we think aging and being old is. And as we get older, we think, well, I may not be able to do what I was able to do when I was 20 or 30 or 40, but I kind of like my peaceful life now. I like being able to ride my e-bike as opposed to, and if that's the pleasure that you have, then that's the pleasure that you have, right? Like who's to judge him for, I can't believe you're not riding a regular bike like you were when you were a kid. You can't do that. And so what I'm saying is replacing someone's judgment or making a judgment call about quality of life. That's not fair. It's not fair.
No, I agree.
This morning, one of the things we wanted to talk about was it was a reader, one of the winners. I know.
I was going to say that we had a question from one of our book winners regarding what to do about relatives with increasing limitations or dementia who may not recognize their limitations or
maybe they do.
Or maybe they do, but they refuse help.
And I think that gets back to, so one of the reasons why I really like this topic, it's a very difficult one, is because it has to do with choices that people make. And so last week we talked about end of life choices, right? And where our headspace is when we make those end of life choices, and trying to, as the agent, the power of attorney, having to make that choice for someone when they are in that coma and things like that. And so this question I really liked, because so you have someone who's clearly not in a coma, they're clearly not end of life, but they are grabbing onto and holding onto their independence as hard and as long as possible, and they're not being particularly cooperative with care. And what does that mean? And it's really hard as a family member or even a neighbor, a child, to talk, to have these conversations with the parent. But, if you have an obstinate parent and say, I'm fine, but they're not. And so one of the questions was, well, what if they're driving? What if, and they shouldn't be? And how do we get someone to cooperate? And they want to also know what resources were available.
Well, every town is different, right? Every town has different regulations, I think.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead?
Well, when you say different regulations, I think
maybe even
right.
different resources.
I think that's
better.
yeah. Mm-hmm. They have different resources.
Yep.
And some towns have chosen to provide a lot of resources for elderly people and who live in the town. And so they have typically have an office, and there's at least one person who has been hired by the town just to deal with elderly issues. And that could be as simple as helping elderly people navigate the reduced property tax benefit that they can get, right? Or to get a reduction in their health insurance premiums based on their age. Those types of things, which are really fantastic, and they help save people who are on fixed incomes, help save money for them. But now, when it comes to the issues that Marianne was raising, which is you have people who have an increasing need for help, and oftentimes they don't recognize that themselves, or they're ignoring it, or they just don't have, or they're embarrassed.
They refuse help. They're embarrassed.
They're embarrassed that they don't want to ask for help, that they know that they're not keeping up with their personal hygiene, or keeping up with cleaning the house, or keeping up with taking their medications on time, or keeping up with eating properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of those things can lead to a diagnosis of dementia, which in some cases can be reversed if properly addressed.
Right, because so don't forget, if you don't eat for a day, so if you're fasting, you know how you get very lightheaded, right?
Yeah, but I'll be just for one day? No, you could get away with that.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if you have poor nutrition, then on a regular basis, and some elderly do, because they're not getting out to buy groceries, or they're too afraid to light the stove, or they're not making meals for themselves, or things like that, over a period of time, then your body's not getting the proper nutrition, nutrients, vitamins, and that can create fogginess and forgetfulness and signs that we would consider of dementia. So we may just look at them and say, oh, that's an old person with dementia. But if you provide them with Meals on Wheels and proper nutrition and support, you'd be amazed at how they can reclaim their cognitive capabilities because they are healthy, right? So you had that personal experience. I want to say, right?
No, it didn't happen to me personally.
Well, okay, that's true.
Well, actually,
I hope not.
I was just thinking about a case where I was appointed by a probate court to be the conservator of someone who was actually, at the time, 55 years old. And she was disabled, living in the house. That was her parents' house. Both of her parents had died. And her sons were both heroin addicts. And they were stealing from her. They were taking her medications. And they were taking her money. And so she was not eating properly. She ended up in the hospital. And that's where the court got involved. That's where a conservatorship proceeding happened. And that's where I was appointed.
Yep.
And the really interesting thing was that she was diagnosed with dementia at age 55, diagnosed with dementia.
Yep.
And the expectation was that she was going to need care the rest of her life and all that. Well, not too long after that, when she went to a nursing home, she got proper medication, got proper food, nutrition, which is bringing me to this.
Yeah.
I think it was the nutrition thing.
I agree
was
with you.
Deficiencies because
Yep.
she got to the point where she was involuntarily conserved, meaning the court found she was incapable of making decisions for herself, to where 2 years ago she was restored, meaning the court agreed, yes, she now had the capacity to make decisions for herself. And she still asked me to stay on as her voluntary conservator, but now she's looking at getting out of she's not in a nursing home, she's in a residential care home, which provides more support, but now she's looking to get out and get an apartment on her own. And the point is that's a success story, right?
Absolutely.
That's where
I'd like to hear that,
somebody was diagnosed with dementia and
Hospitalized because of that.
Yep.
So
Right.
you have the most
this is
highest
good.
level of care,
Right.
went to a skilled nursing home, needed skilled care. And,
for a short period of time.
Yep. And now, and you've even tried, she participated in some job, vocational training and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you pull the person out of an unhealthy environment, which this person was in, and look at what you can do. Now, she didn't go necessarily willingly, we have to say,
Right.
into the hospital, which is one of the concerns that that Kathy had raised on her question, because what if you hate to have someone land themselves in the hospital before they actually get the help that they need. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's what has to happen. But there are resources and there are things that we can try to do. In the case that Ned's talking about, this woman had family, but they had no reason to utilize those resources, right? Because they were taking her money from her. And, she thought that was the life that she had and she didn't necessarily know better. But most of us don't have that, don't have children who are heroin addicts don't have a family that is going to allow that happen to our parents. So we reach out to those resources.
Like wellness checks, I'm thinking, right?
Wellness checks are wonderful because most people do let the police in, right? Because if you have a social worker who's knocking on your door,
You may not know who that person
and they're
is.
like, Mr. Barron, are you okay? Can you let us in? And Mr. Barron's going to say, I'm fine. Leave me alone, right? But usually when the police officer shows up, you open the door. Usually a police officer, so you respect that level of authority, and they will go in and they can kind of take an assessment. Police officers are mandatory reporters. So the police officer is going to make a recommendation and a referral to the local agencies. But wellness checks are an easy way to be able to do that. So neighbors, it doesn't have to be a family, right?
Sure.
We had another case that Ned and I were involved in. An older woman, she happened to live in my neighborhood, okay? And when my kids were growing up, we always saw her driving. And everyone in the neighborhood knew when she pulled out of the driveway in her car that we ran for the sidewalks. we ran for the lawn, we ran for everything, right? But she had a neighbor who would make sure the lawn was done and was taking care of her. She refused help from anybody other than maybe having a little lawn service. In her case, unfortunately, she fell down her stairs inside and she broke both of her arms.
Wow.
And it wasn't until she was taken to the hospital, and that was her wake-up call, and that was when she reached out to me, mostly because she was so upset that there was some sort of government intervention in her life. That social services was involved. But we fixed up her house. We got her back home. We got her the services that she needed. And let me tell you, she was a little spitfire, and she lasted several years, and she passed away only right before she turned 100. Okay?
Goodness. Yeah.
So you don't want to have those type of wake-up calls, but that's what it took in her case. But, you can also, social services, and I'm talking about like each town has a social service. You can, whether it's a family member, you can make it anonymous. You can call them and just say, hey, I think that this person needs something. Can you check on them? So it's a little different than a wellness check from.
Well, they'll send the police, right? And then the police can then call an ambulance if they need to.
But you can do.
Well, there's also so the Connecticut Department of Social Services has Adult Protective Services.
Yep.
And you might think Adult Protective Services means that if there's an adult who is it sounds a little more dramatic than what it is. But as far as wellness checks go. You can make an anonymous call to them. Call Connecticut Department of Social Services, Adult Protective Services. You make a call. You tell them about this person. You give them the information. Then they send out a social worker, but they have the power of the state behind them to knock on the door and say, hey, I'm from Adult Protective Services. We've had a call of someone's concern. Who was it? I can't tell you. That's anonymous.
Correct.
But I'm here to see how you're doing. And they're trained to pick up on all the cues. They're trained to, look at the person, to listen to what they're saying, to anyway, if that person refuses to let them into the house, then they can escalate it and they can go to the police and ask for an escort for the police to go with them to go to the house. So it can be escalated in that. And I've seen cases where again, like Marianne's saying, where with the right services being provided, that these people are able to live more, have a higher quality of life and
live to their fullest.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, and let's face it. I mean, social services can offer so many things. It could be something serious that they're responding to, or it's just malnutrition. They could offer Meals on Wheels. They could offer so many other things to prolong their quality of life.
They can. Now, obviously, the person has to accept Meals on Wheels, right? Obviously, the person has to be willing to. And sometimes you are going to have somebody who is not cooperative. I mean, let's face it, that can happen. Sure. And if they have capacity, then that's their choice, right? So if I have capacity and I choose not to have treatment or not to accept Meals on Wheels because for whatever reason, I think the food looks gross, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Then that's my choice and you have to honor it. But it is if I have capacity.
Okay.
Right?
Well, no, I want you to finish your thought, and then I'm going to give you a little.
Here you go. This is,
we're right back at it.
What I'm saying is that when a person, it's when you're in that in between stage, or they don't have capacity, when your child is trying to say, "Mom, let me in," or "Let's do this." That is that gray area that is so emotionally drain. You want so badly to provide for them, and they're saying no. And what's the reason for it? And sometimes it requires some more drastic measures, like making that anonymous call. But what? Now I'm so curious. Now you made me lose my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
You're off track.
I apologize. Well, so the thing that you were making me think of in that moment was that when you said that if they have the capacity to make those decisions not to accept the help. And one of the things when a probate court judge is considering when there is an involuntary conservatorship proceeding for the judge to determine whether or not this person has capacity is, are they making good decisions for themselves? Right. So, for example, if and we'll use the Meals on Wheels example. Yeah. If someone is saying, or if the evidence is showing that they are nutritionally deficient because they're not eating, they've been offered a solution to help them with that, and yet they're refusing. In the eyes, I would argue, in the eyes of many probate court judges, that would be one piece of evidence that the person does not have capacity because they're not making a decision to eat to help keep themselves healthy. Same thing with refusing medical treatment.
Then conservatorship, should that be considered? Can an application be pulled for
Absolutely.
To apply for?
You try not to have to get to that level to take your own parent or family
Well, no,
member
but
to
the way
court,
he's describing it.
Absolutely,
Right,
you
okay.
can.
Yeah, I mean that one so that they're in convincing a judge that someone is in need of a conservator or it lacks capacity, there has to be the totality of evidence, right? That's not the only piece. Another piece could be that they are continuing to use their car in an unsafe manner.
Oh, that
right?
makes me so nervous when
right.
people do that.
Right, but that's just another one, and the judge could ask them, "Do you how's your driving ability?" Right?
Fine.
And they say, "Fine, I can drive fine." Well, have you had
I only
13 tickets in the last?
I only drive to the store.
Right.
I want to talk about the liabilities there. Just give me I got to do a quick ID. Folks, you are listening to Legal Notes with Mary Ann, Charron, and Ned Barron from the Charter Oak Law Group. If you've got questions pertaining to the topics that we discussed during this show, not just today, but any week during this time slot, please give them a call at 860-570-1229. You can also check out their website, charteroaklaw.com. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you because you were on a roll here, but there's got to be liability there when someone who should not be behind the wheel for the reasons that you mentioned end up behind the wheel. Please continue.
Go ahead. You're on the roll.
Well, and now we're on a different subject.
No,
it's related. No, go ahead. I mean,
I wanted to say that oftentimes the liability is tied into knowledge, and sometimes I would say liability is tied into whether you are your parent's power of attorney or not, right? Because if you have some legal responsibility, your parent is unsafe, your parent shouldn't be driving, and you are the power of attorney. I think of it from a litigation perspective. So let's say your parent caused a car accident, and there was some significant harm to somebody else, and that your parent got sued, but then some attorney said, wait a minute, I'm going to go after the kid who is the power of attorney. And if I'm the attorney, I'm like, wait a minute, you knew that your parent needed care. You knew, you've taken them to the doctors. You've told your parent that you shouldn't be driving. You've done whatever you have, and yet you still allowed. All you had to do is take the keys away. All you had to do is disconnect the battery, and you chose not to do those things. So I think if you are the power of attorney, that there is the potential for some liability there, particularly if, you are supposed to be assisting your parent and they picked you to assist them. All right. But I've told people, I think Ned probably has too. I'm like, take those keys. And when they're like, where are my keys? You're like, Dad, I don't know where you put them. Where did you put them last, Dad? Don't you? I mean, have you? I've said that to people, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes. I don't think that. Well,
but being a family member doesn't make you liable.
No, not in and of itself. No, that's correct.
And I would argue being a power of attorney, which deals with financial. So when you give someone a power of, and you name someone as an agent under your power of attorney, you're giving them the legal authority to conduct any financial transaction you would be able to conduct.
That's a financial power.
Right, but I don't. So, and then the other one we have is a healthcare representative,
right,
or a healthcare power of attorney, as some people call it. And so that's for healthcare decision making if the person can't make healthcare decisions for themselves. So I don't believe that either one of them have a legal duty to make sure that the parent who's unsafe to drive doesn't drive, which means if they had a legal duty, then they could be legally liable. So I disagree with you a little bit with that. I'm sure, I would say there are plenty of attorneys who would make that argument in court that they did have a duty.
Yes,
and that
that's
therefore
all I'm
they
saying.
are right. But would they be successful? I don't think they would be. However,
it depends on how good or how bad that child witness is. I mean, let me tell you, if they tank in court, then even though they probably shouldn't be liable, they might be found liable. So I'm saying an attorney who is fishing for something, then that's what you have something to hold on to. But
there's a level of responsibility. If you know your parent should not be driving.
And I think it's more of a moral responsibility as opposed to a legal responsibility.
I think he's right. Yeah. I do.
And yes, if you're aware that your parent is driving unsafely, then morally, you should be doing something. And that is, if you can't convince them, contacting the the Adult Protective Services.
Yes.
At the very least, Adult Protective Services, you tell them about it. That way it takes you out of the equation.
Yeah.
It's anonymous. And they could just say, sorry, we got an anonymous call that you were an unsafe driver, and they can do the investigation. And pretty much the maximum that they can do is to petition the probate court to have a conservator appointed. And then that conservator would then have the authority to take away the car, to take away the
license. Really.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Ned, I do agree with you. I was just saying, if you are that power of attorney for someone, there is the possibility that an attorney who is going to say you have some responsibility and can pull you in. I agree with you in terms of whether they would actually be at the end of the day successful with that argument, but I do think that it is possible. And that's why I just think it's really important. It's very simple to make sure those keys are taken away. It's very simple to disengage the battery, although if they got their wits about them, they'll call AAA.
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple. We've seen cases where the parent has been get out of my life. Basically excluded the kids that are trying to help. And the parents say, don't call me, don't come around anymore.
We have seen that, and that's where you have to go.
But if they're a danger to themselves or others on the road, you've got like you said, a moral responsibility
Absolutely.
to pull the keys or call the police and describe the car and license plate.
Absolutely.
I think that's all collectively as humanity. We have that responsibility to others who cannot make judgment calls for themselves for various reasons, including which you just outlined. Folks, another great show here. Valuable information. If you like this show, if you've got information if there's information, I should say, that you would like to obtain for personal reasons, maybe something's going on in your family, please contact Mary Ann Charron and Ned Barron over at Charter Oak Law at 860-570-1229. Again, 860-570-1229. 1229. Also check out their website. There's a lot of information there and may even spark other questions. Who knows? I would start there. www.charteroaklaw.com. Again, it's charteroaklaw.com. For Mary Ann Charron and Ned Barron, I'm Gary Byron. Thank you so much for listening to Legal Notes. Until next Saturday morning, have a good one, everybody. So long.